For most of his life, the harbor wasn't just somewhere he worked. It was the center of his world. Salt air, steel, fog creeping over the water in early mornings. The echo of distant horns from ships sliding slowly across the horizon. He didn't grow up around bright city lights or tall skyline towers. He didn't grow up chasing money or fame. He didn't dream of boardrooms or leather chairs. He grew up in a place where life felt heavy, grounded, real. Where hands mattered, where sweat mattered, where showing up mattered, and where a boy could look at massive ships rising out of skeleton frames and think, I want to be part of that. Not because someone told him to dream big, but because he wanted to belong. He remembered being young, standing near the fences of the shipyard, small hands wrapped in metal mesh, staring through as men in dark jackets and heavy boots worked among sparks and echoing crashes. He could feel the ground shake when steel plates slammed into place. He could see men shouting to each other through noise so loud it swallowed everything else. He didn't understand the details. He didn't know about engineering or production schedules or contracts. He only knew one thing. This place was alive, and the men who worked here seemed like giants. Not superheroes, not celebrities, but giants of something real. They created ships that would one day carry people across oceans. Ships that would travel farther than he would ever see. And those men, those ordinary men, they built them. That mattered to him, even as a boy. He didn't want a life that floated. He wanted a life that meant something. So when school ended, he didn't spend years deciding. He didn't wander. He walked through the same gates he'd once looked through. Now, not as a boy watching, but as a worker entering. His first day was overwhelming. He remembered noise, not just loud, but constant, like the place itself was breathing. Burning metal, sweat, cold wind from the harbor mixing with heat from welders. Nobody greeted him with celebration. There were no speeches. No, welcome to the team banners. Someone pointed and said, you start over there. That was it. No hand-holding, no life plan, just work. And he did it. He carried steel. He swept metal dust. He brought tools to men too busy to even look at him. No one clapped. No one congratulated him. But at the end of the day, he walked home exhausted, hand-stained, arms trembling, and he never felt more proud. Not proud like winning something. Not proud like applause. Proud in a quiet way. In a way that whispered, you did something real today. Time passed. He learned. You don't learn a place like this from manuals. You learn with your body, with burns on your arms, with cuts on your fingers, with mistakes you never repeat twice. He learned how steel sounded when it was shaped right. He learned the smell of overheating metal. He learned to read flame, to feel vibration, to trust instinct. He learned to stand firmly on ground that trembled beneath machines. He learned to work with men who didn't use many words, but whose silence meant respect. And slowly, he wasn't the new guy anymore. He was one of them. Not special, not extraordinary, just solid. And there's a quiet dignity in that. His life found rhythm. Mornings were early, long before sunrise, when the world felt cold and unfinished. Coffee at the same small table, hands wrapped around a warm mug, silence in the kitchen, except maybe a radio murmuring softly, boots by the door, jacket on the chair, lunch in the same batter box, same walk, same road, same harbor coming into view in the morning mist. Some people fear routine. They feel trapped by it. But for him, routine wasn't a prison. Routine was stability. Routine was purpose. Routine was love in motion. Because every paycheck meant food on the table, fuel in the tank, clothes for the kids, lights staying on, Christmas being possible. He didn't say these things out loud. Men like him rarely did. But every single day, he chose his family by choosing to show up. People sometimes say, it's just a job, but jobs like his were never just anything. He could look at the harbor and say, that one, I worked on that hull. He could watch news of a ship somewhere far away and think, I touched something that is out there now. No one else would know. There would be no plaque with his name. But he knew. He also knew that if he didn't do his part right, someone somewhere could pay the price. Responsibility like that changes how a man stands. He didn't walk with arrogance, but he walked with weight. The good kind, the kind that says, I matter. The yard wasn't just metal and machines. It was men sharing cigarettes at break, even when they shouldn't smoke. It was jokes shouted over noise, half unheard, but everyone laughing anyway. It was someone handing you a tool before you even asked, because they already knew what you needed. It was the bulletin board with birth announcements, wedding photos, little handwritten notes that said car for sale, runs decent. They watched each other age, saw hair gray, back stiffen, hands scar more, and yet, each morning they stood side by side again. They weren't brothers by blood, but they were something very close. The kind of bond you don't get in offices, don't get behind screens, don't get in jobs where nothing you touch is real. They didn't always say they cared about each other, but if one man fell, 3 others grabbed him. That was the kind of place it was. But time moves, the world shifts, decisions are made far away by people who never touched steel. At first, no one noticed much. A rumor here, a whisper there. Someone shakes their head at break and says, did you hear? Words like cost-cutting, competition, cheaper overseas, automation, restructuring, they floated through the yard, like fog no one wanted to admit they saw. Then small changes started. Fewer new hires, less overtime, longer delays between projects. Nobody wanted to believe it. Places like this don't disappear. Harbors don't go quiet. Shipyards don't become ghosts. Except, sometimes they do. One day, they called everyone together. Not for celebration, not for recognition. For the opposite, executives no one had seen much before stood in front. Their suits looked wrong here. Too clean, too fragile for this place. They spoke politely, professionally, but the words, cut like steel, operations will cease, difficult decision, economic realities. Thank you for your service. We appreciate your dedication. Just words, cold, careful, lifeless. And then, it was done. Years of sweat, years of mornings before sunrise, years of noise and fire and pride, reduced to a statement. Men didn't scream. They didn't throw tools. They didn't break things. They just stood quietly, looking at the yard, like someone looks at a dying friend, knowing there's nothing left to do. That silence hurt more than anger ever could. He walked slowly those final days, not because he was weak, but because he wanted to remember. He touched railings worn smooth by years of use. He ran his hand across cold steel and felt echoes of warmth it used to hold. He listened to the yard, clanks, rattles, machinery slowing, not stopping fast, but fading. There is a strange kind of grief in watching something powerful become still. The last day came. No horns, no music, no ceremony, just men packing their tools and not quite knowing where to put their hands afterward. He stood a while longer, after others left, looked over the silent harbor, and whispered something only he heard. Thank you. Not many people thank their workplace, but he knew the truth. This place gave him a life. The first morning without work felt wrong. He woke up automatically, long before sunrise, Habits still lived in his bones. He sat in the kitchen. No rules, no purpose, no weight of a day ahead. The world outside kept moving. Traffic still passed. Birds still sang. But for him, everything felt unnaturally still. People always joke. Imagine not having to work anymore. They rarely talk about what it feels like when work wasn't a burden, but a foundation. He didn't just lose income. He lost rhythm, direction, belonging. The house felt too quiet, the days too long. He tried to stay busy, fixing small things, walking, watching television with sound too low, because the silence was loud enough already. But nothing filled the same space, because it wasn't just time he missed identity. The shipyard didn't just support him, it supported the town. Shops depended on those paychecks. Cafes lived off morning coffee orders. Schools were filled by families who stayed because work existed. Without the yard, the town began to dim. Slowly, quietly, painfully. One business closed, then another, then another. For sale signs appeared, like winter frost across streets. Some neighbors moved, some stayed, not because there was hope, but because there was nowhere else to go. A place that once felt solid, now felt fragile. Not dead, just fading. And fading can hurt longer than breaking. He sometimes drove near the harbor, not to torture himself, not to live in the past, but because he couldn't simply pretend that decades didn't happen. He would sit in his car, watching calm water where once noise lived. He could still hear it. In his head, machines roaring, metal screaming, men laughing through exhaustion. Memory is strange. It hurts, but it also protects. It doesn't let everything vanish. So even when the harbor was silent, inside him, it still breathed. He didn't become bitter. He didn't spend the rest of his life angry. He was sad, yes. He missed it, yes. He would always feel like a chapter ended mid-sentence. But he also understood something important. A place closing doesn't erase a life lived inside it. Work ending doesn't erase meaning. Corporate decisions can shut gates. Economic shifts can silence machines. But they cannot delete dignity. They cannot erase years of honest labor. They cannot take pride from a man who built things that touched the world. He did not fail. He completed something. He completed years of purpose. He completed a lifetime of showing up. He completed a story built quietly, without applause, without spotlight, but with strength. He didn't talk much about feelings. Men like him rarely did. But his family always knew what he carried. They saw it in his hands when he came home late. They saw it in the quiet way he sat down at the table, tired but present. They saw it in the way he never complained, even when his back hurt, even when the long shifts stretched into longer weeks. He was not the type to say, "I love you every day," but every morning when he woke early, every time he packed his lunchbox, every time he walked out the door into cold morning air, he was saying it without words. Work for him was a language, a way to build more than ships. He was building a life. He remembered birthdays, even if he was late. He fixed broken things at home, even when he was exhausted. He showed up to school events, with grease still on his hands sometimes. But he showed up, and years later, his children didn't remember tiredness. They remembered steadiness. They remembered safety. They remembered knowing that, no matter what, he would always come back. That was love. Quiet, solid, unshakable. Retirement wasn't a celebration. It wasn't balloons or cake. It was learning to exist without a rhythm. He would sit sometimes with an old photo in his hands, a picture of himself much younger, standing beside the frame of a ship still unfinished. Back then, he hadn't thought much about the future. He wasn't planning a legacy. He wasn't shaping history on purpose. He was just working. But now, with years behind him, he finally understood. He had lived a full life. Not perfect, not easy, but meaningful. He started noticing small things again. Morning light through the kitchen window, the slow comfort of coffee, the sound of wind across quiet water, a walk through town where familiar places still whispered memory. He wasn't racing time anymore. For the first time, time simply moved with him, and that was okay. People measure success in strange ways sometimes. Money, titles, recognition. He didn't have much of any of those. But when he looked back, there was something far greater. People who lived better because he worked. A family who grew strong. A town that survived longer because men like him held it up. And ships that traveled oceans, carrying hopes, dreams, and lives. Somewhere out there, over waters he would never see, a part of him still moved forward. That mattered, even if nobody ever said his name. He never wanted to be a hero. He only wanted to do his job, do it right, and do it with dignity. But sometimes, that is heroism. Not loud, not dramatic, not legendary in history books, but legendary where it counts. In the lives of those who depended on him, in memories that didn't fade, in the deep respect of those who knew what he gave, and in the simple truth. He was there, every day, year after year, when the world needed people like him most. The harbor may have gone silent, but his story didn't. It lives in the people who remember, in the places he shaped, in the work he gave everything to. And as long as stories like his are told, ordinary lives will never be forgotten because they were never ordinary. Not really. Before we forgot, he was never famous. He never stood on stages. He never published books or ran companies or chased headlines. But ships sailed because he worked. Families survived because he stayed. Towns existed because men like him chose to build instead of abandon. And millions of people in the world will never know his name, but they were carried, literally, by things he helped create. That is legacy, not loud, not celebrated, but real. This isn't a tragic story. This is a human story about work, about identity, about loss, about pride, about the quiet strength of ordinary lives. Lives that are not really ordinary at all, because without men like him, nothing stands, nothing moves, nothing lasts. And even though the harbor eventually went silent, his story doesn't. Not as long as we remember. Not as long as we speak about men like him. Not as long as we tell the truth that ordinary workers build the world. Before we forgot,